have a look at the two trees here and the two main trees that are here. There's other trees in the background. I'd like you to know and understand something, that these trees have got the bark on there, and we know these things. But I want to just explain to you something about something that protects them as well. Bark is like having a big coat on. It protects the inner part, a bit like us. If we have a jumper or a coat on, it protects us from the cold. That actually protects us from the fire. So where you've got, you can see the darkness in the bark. There's been a fire that's come through, and if they have too many fires over each year, the fire seasons, that will eventually kill the tree. So that bark, the coat, is really important in how it protects the trees. Do you understand that?
Yes.
The other one is with Aboriginal people, Yunga people who have lived here for many thousands of years. This tree over here with the darkness on it, that's a medicine tree, okay? So where the sap comes out of that tree, that's more like me having one of these, and I'm, well, not that one. Happy to show you my lozenger, okay? These lozenges to help me with my itchy throat. If I need to take one, I can take one. Well, in those days, 500 years ago, thousands of years ago, people didn't have these things. What we did have was the medicine from those trees. So we could just eat a little tiny bit and it tastes really yucky. We could have and suck on, like a lozenge, that stuff, the medicine, and it would help our throat. Okay? Because in those days, people didn't have a pharmacy or a chemist. People didn't have big shopping centres. So all around the bush area where people lived and had to walk and find food, they were pretty amazing to know that. Pretty amazing people to survive well and live well in this sort of environment.
Okay, good morning everyone. Just wanted to talk today, most of what I talked about today will be about the water. And we're going to move down so we can get a better look at the dam in a minute so we can talk specifically about what we're here. But what I wanted to talk to you today about is how valuable water is to us. So today when we came up on the bus, we started at Greenfields, you guys right there? We started at Greenfields Primary. There are lots of cars, there are lots of houses, it's where we live, lots of people around. You probably didn't see so much water around, there are a few trees. That's one land use, that's called urban land use. That's where people live. Then the further and further we got away from Greenfields, the houses started to spread out a little bit more. We got bigger bush blocks, had a few more trees around. And who saw the cows on the way up here? Cows and bulls and things. Yep. So you had some farms with animals on there as well. That's another type of land use. So there's sort of semi-rural land uses. Some of those cows, they're being bred so that we can eat them. So they're not just there as pets. So that's livestock. That's another industry. We sort of turned off and came across through Pinjarra. We went through a sign that said Alcoa. I'm not sure how many of you would have seen the sign for Alcoa. Yep, and that's a big mine site. So that's where Alcoa take a mineral out of the ground called bauxite. They turn that into aluminium. So everyone would have used some aluminium today. Some of the drink bottles that you're drinking out of will be made out of aluminium. When you have a drink of Coke or some other soft drink, that's in an aluminium can. Parts of the bus will be made out of aluminium as well. So that's all around us. So aluminium mining goes on as well. And then today we're up here, we're right up the top of the catchment, and here we're looking at the water for drinking. And you look at the trees around the outside of the water that we have for drinking. So there's all these different land uses, and that's what I really want you to take note of on the drive up here. And hopefully when I talk to you today, you'll be able to relate some of the things I tell you about those different land uses. But the most important message for today is of all of the things I've spoken about, so livestock, so breeding cattle so we can eat them, the mining so we can get aluminium out of the ground, the most valuable resource of all is water. So without water we can't do any of those things. Without water we can't live. So the thing that makes the difference between places where there's life and where there's no life is water. So my story today is going to be about the water. We've sort of done it in reverse on the bus trip up here. I'll sort of talk more about where the water goes to from here down to the bottom of the hill down to Greenfields as well. So I'll be speaking mostly about water. If you have any questions, I'll stop. You can just put your hand in the air and I'll answer your questions. But as I said, we'll move down, if it's okay with Mrs. Wally, just move down onto the viewing platform over here so you can get a better look at the water. I can tell you more about where we are and why it's an important place. So we're okay to move? We're talking and everyone can hear. So the place we're at now is called South Dandalup Dam. So it's called South Dandalup because that's the area we're in. It's also because this river behind us is the South Dandalup River. So this dam was built in 1971, or in the early 1970s, so about 50 something years ago. It's the biggest dam in the Perth metro area. So this is the biggest one that we have in the whole of Perth. There's a whole bunch of them that are around. This is the biggest one. So just a couple, I won't tell you too many numbers because they don't mean too much to you, but the South Dandalup Dam has got a capacity of about 135 billion litres. So it's a big number. Just to put it into perspective, every year in Perth, we use about 300 billion litres. So it's about 5 months worth of supply is in this dam when it's full. So the dam isn't full, it's only got about 25% full at the moment. So the water we can see in behind us here, if we didn't have any other sources of water and this was the only source we had, we would use all of this water in about a month and a half to 2 months. So that's how much water we use. That's how much water we have in the dam. So the dam wasn't here before. Before the dam was here, it was just a river. So the river would wind its way down. It was much smaller than what we can see behind us. We continue down on the other side of the dam wall. So this water up here is really, really important because we drink this water. So we drink it. We also use it for watering our gardens and washing cars and having showers and things. But this is our supply of drinking water. So it doesn't just supply Mandurah, but also supplies Perth. So we have a thing called the Integrated Water Supply Scheme, which is all of the water that we have gets sort of pooled together and we use it all through Perth and Mandurah. So some of the water that's up here is from rainfall. Can anyone think of where some of the other water might come from that ends up in the dam here? Yep.
It comes from some of the water under the ground.
Yeah, very good. So it's called groundwater. So it comes from some of the water under the ground. That's called groundwater for obvious reasons. So we're standing on a catchment which is like a big sponge, and that sponge gets filled up with water. So over millions of years, rain falls, it fills up the sponge under our feet, and every year when it rains it sort of gets topped up a little bit. Because we're in a drying climate at the moment, because we don't get as much rain as we used to, we're using that water faster than what it can be replenished in the sponge. So we're slowly squeezing the sponge out. So yeah, that's a good answer. So groundwater makes up about 35%, about a third of the amount of water that we use for drinking. You've got your hand up at the back there. You've got another source for us? Another drinking water source? Comes from where? The sewers? Yeah, that's good answer. We don't use very much of that. We only use about 3% of water that's been through a sewer. We only use about 3% of that in our drinking water. So that's called recycled water. So we take the sewage. Sewage is stuff that comes from your toilet, also from showers and other places. We take the water, take the chunky bits out of it, and then get the water purified so we can drink, and then that goes into our drinking water supply as well. That's only a really tiny portion, but that'll get bigger and bigger as time goes on and the climate change bites harder and harder. Yep.
Does that torch looking thing like out under the water like borrows it and does stuff and then put it into like tanks and when it gets shipped out?
Yeah, so what happens, the water from here goes from a big pipe down into a smaller dam called a pipehead dam. That's a few kilometres away down that way. And from that pipehead dam, then it gets distributed out to business, to industry, to schools, to houses and all that sort of stuff through a whole bunch of pipes. So, yep. So other sources of water, yeah? You get your hand up there?
Rain.
Yeah, rain is an important one. We've had less and less rain since about 1960 across the whole world. There's been less and less rainfall. So we only get a really small proportion of rainfall that we used to get. It's a really good point though. It's something like 25%, I think, of the water that we drink comes from rainfall. And I'll talk about in a minute why it's really important that we maintain our catchment. So there's one other really important source of water that we haven't got to yet. Yep. Did you want to get a question or?
If rain, if rain goes,
Ah, it doesn't matter. We'll probably cover it as we go. Yep. The ocean, yeah, that's right. So ocean, the difference between the water that we drink and ocean water, anyone know what the difference between the ocean water and water that we drink is? Yeah, you haven't answered the question yet.
that the ocean water is salty.
Yeah, that's right. Ocean water is really salty. So it's got about 35 grams every litre. So a few teaspoons of salt in every litre of water that comes out of the ocean. So we do a thing called desalination, where we take the salt out of the water and then we use that for drinking. So yeah, that makes up about a third, 35%. So we've got about a third of it's groundwater, about a third of it is desalination water from the ocean, and then there's about a little bit less than a third comes from rainfall, then the last little bit is from recycling sewage and other things that we use for drinking. So that's where all the sources come from. I'll get to you in a second, just put your hand out. That's all the sources. All that stuff gets mixed up together. It gets purified so we can drink it, so it gets treated in different ways, usually chlorine and other things that they do to it to try to kill off the bugs in it. It's safe to drink, and then that gets pumped around to the different dams. So some of it comes up here to South Dandalup. There's another dam called North Dandalup, which is just to our north, strangely enough, not very far away. There's other dams like Serpentine Dam, Canning Dam. There's a Mundaring Weir. The Mundaring Weir pumps water up to Kalgoorlie. So all of that water all comes from the same place. It comes from rainfall, it comes from the sponge under our feet, it comes from taking the salt out of seawater, and just a little bit of recycling of sewage. It all gets mixed up into a brew, and then that's what we drink. So the reason we've had to do that, we can't rely just on rainfall anymore, or there just wouldn't be enough water. We'd run out. Like I said, there's only about a month or two storage of water in here. If we don't get enough to replace that, then we'd all run out of water. So that's the reason why we have to top it up with all these other sources. Yep. How come the what, sorry? New Zealand water is more clear than ours, more cleaner. They get a little bit more rain than what we do because they're a little bit further down the south and closer to the Antarctic. And they also have snow. The snow melts, and that's really pure water as well. So they've got a few different sources. They get more rainwater. They don't have to rely so much on seawater as us. Other places, like desert places in the Middle East, they rely a lot on desalinating seawater. So a lot on taking seawater and taking salt out and drinking that. So it depends on where you are in the globe. But here we use about a third rainfall, a third groundwater, and a third from the sea. Yep.
How do we feed salt ocean water?
Really good question. How do we take the salt out of ocean water? So it's a process called reverse osmosis. So that's a long word. It's a bit like Mr. Wally's word for cold-blooded animals warming up on rocks. So reverse osmosis is something that goes on in our body. It's where you have a membrane, like a cell wall, and water. You can have salty water on one side of it and fresh water on the other. The fresh water goes across to the salty side to try to dilute the salt out of the system. That's called osmosis. Reverse osmosis is where it goes the other way. So what we do is we put a pressure on the water and we push it through a membrane, which is like a filter. All the salt gets left on one side and the fresh water comes out the other side. So what it means is if we have a litre of seawater, we take all the salt out of half of it, so we get a half a litre of really fresh water, and the other half a litre's got twice as much salt in it as what it otherwise would have. And then we put that back out in the ocean. So all of our desal plants are on the ocean because that's where the closest source of water is. The salty water goes back out into the ocean as well. So reverse osmosis is the answer. And then once we've done that, we pump it up the hill into the dam. So there's a lot of energy that goes into making water from seawater. You can have them at home, but you need to have a source of salty water. So you need to live right on the beach, and you've got to be able to get it from the beach somehow or other. So you can. I mean, some of the water purifiers that you have at home, they're a little bit different. They take other things out, so it's not quite the same thing. You can head your hand.
Is that when you say the salt water where you have to dip it back in? Is that what that little thing on the end of that light pot thing is for?
No, not really. It's already had all the salt taken out of it before it comes up into here. You can't see the pipe where it comes in here. It's under the water. So, yeah.
So usually come from
The water at the beach. Yeah, I mean, overall in the earth, the water that's in the ocean, it rains on the ocean as well. So the ocean does get topped up with rainwater as well. It also gets topped up with things like melting ice. So in Antarctica and in the Arctic in particular, there's lots of ice that goes in. our rivers run out into the sea as well. So the fresh water we have here ends up in the ocean as well. And even the stuff that goes down the toilet, the sewage you were talking about before, that gets cleaned up, a lot of that gets pumped out into the ocean too. So you have this thing called the water cycle, where water is in a rain cloud, it'll drop, across land usually, but also in the ocean as well, it'll drop its water down, it'll flow out through the rivers and streams, back out into the ocean again. It's evaporated by the sun on the way, goes back up into a cloud, and goes around in a circle like that. So the water doesn't change, it just goes to a different place. It's the same water that just gets recycled over and over again through that cycle.
I got a question.
Yep.
We did the water cycle last week's lessons. You can remember the P word, the
Precipitation.
You're amazing. Precipitation, that's when the water comes down, isn't it? So what happens when the water goes up? It evaporates. And then what's the word as it's transferring?
Wait.
Give it a go.
Condensation.
You're amazing. Precipitation, evaporation, condensation.
Very good. Well, I'm glad that something's relevant to what I'm saying. So that's the story of the dam. That's why it's really important that we protect this water. That's why you'll see these signs around here saying drinking water catchment, reservoir protection zone, no entry. So we can't go over there, we can't go swimming in it, we can't go boating in it, because we want to keep this water as clean as we can, because in the end we're going to drink it.
I was swimming in that one.
In here, I'm not sure if you would have swum here. There are other dams, like Waruna Dam, where you can go swimming.
Oh no, it might not have been that one.
Oh, well, last year we were about the same. I don't think this will ever fill again. And it's a lot of it's artificial, so it's because we're pumping water up into it. So yeah, it'll never get to its capacity. And I don't think we'll ever build more dams. I think this isn't the most recent. North Dandalup is the most recent dam, but I don't think we'll build another one. So we're just using it for storage at the moment. One of the other really important things is with storage, we can also store water underground as well. So before I was talking about that sponge that gets filled up, we have empty parts of the sponge. We can actually pump some of the water into that sponge, so we can collect it during winter, put it into the ground, into the aquifer, that's what the sponge is called, and during summer we can pull that back out again. So that's another source of water for it. Yeah, look, it's a really great question, and we'll talk about that now, and hopefully I'll answer your question and I'll let you a bit of steel. George, you want to say something, or do you want me to keep
Oh, no.
Yep. Okay, so I can talk forever. So this wall that we have here that divides, that blocks off the water, before the dam was here, there was just a river called the South Dandalup River that ran that way for a few kilometres. There's the other dam, I'm talking about the North Dandalup River, which has also got a dam on it. That one ran down into the Dandalup River. So the north and south came together in the Dandalup River. Then the Dandalup River runs into the Murray River, not far from Pinjarra, which is sort of not all that far. It's about 20 kilometres away from the school probably. So just pop your hand down, mate, and we'll ask questions in a tick. So that water had all sorts of different uses. Back in the early days, people would have drunk it. We've already spoken about the cows. There's also some mining and other things. All of those downstream uses, and you also use the rivers as well. There's all those downstream uses of that water that get affected by putting a dam on the river. So we don't have the water flowing down, it's just a trickle. In fact, most of the year it's dry, the South Dandalup River. So all of those people that relied on the river for other things were really affected by what happened when they built the dam. So from the dam, every now and then, not often enough as far as I'm concerned, but every now and then they let some of the water out of the dam to go down and flush the river out. So there's a little bit of water that trickles down the river. So people like was it your pop or someone that had the farm that he's building a dam on? Yeah, so he would want to build a dam on his property to take some of the water out of the river so he could feed animals or maybe water a crop or do other things with it. Yep, so he's got those animals and the sheep in particular and the plants. He wants to use some of that water out of the river, not the South Dandalup, but it's probably somewhere else, use some of that water. So yeah, he's got rivers on his farm. He's been near a river. So he wants to dam that water up and use it. If there's no water in the river going downstream, his dam won't work. So there's always this fine balancing act between you build a dam and you cut the supply of water off. What are you going to do to the people downstream of you? Apart from the other things like we spoke about, mining and keeping animals and agriculture as well, there's other things that live in the water that really rely on there being water in the river as well. So can you think of some of the things that might live in the water where they might need water? Yep, down the back there.
Dolphins.
Yeah, dolphins in the Murray River. Yep, yep. In particular, they rely on it. They rely a lot on the seawater as well, but they need a healthy flow of water down the river too. Yep.
Fish.
Fish, yeah, really important. Some of our native fish. Native fish migrate up and down the river. If they don't have a connected river, they've just got a puddle to live in, they can't migrate. And often they'll come and migrate upriver to breed, to have their young. So they're really badly impacted by building dams on rivers. That's why we need to keep a bit of a flow down the river. Yep.
Starfish.
Starfish, yeah, they're more of an ocean species, but yep, they're all part of God's creatures, so yeah, why not? Yep.
Maybe crabs.
Crabs, yeah, so crabs rely on some fresh water flushing down the rivers and streams as well. Someone say yabbies over there?
No, yummy.
Oh, yummy. Yep.
Shark.
Sharks, yeah, well, sharks probably don't come this far up because they're more salty water species as well. But again, if the rivers dry up and the estuary doesn't have as much water in it, then that will impact on them too. The estuary has also got input from the ocean as well, so there's always that water that comes into it too. Yep. Fishing birds, yeah, birds, wading birds, they rely on it. So pelicans, yep, other birds as well. And the other birds, they don't just eat fish, they also eat worms and things out of the mud. So they need a really healthy ecosystem for them to survive as well. Yep, you got your hand up down the back there, yep.
Also yabbies.
Yabbies, yep. Yabbies, they're introduced species, but we'll find them down there. Other types of freshwater crayfish like marron, gilgies, all those sorts of things rely on freshwater. Yep. Yep, you on there, yep.
Stingrays.
Stingrays, yeah, again, they're an ocean species, so they rely more on water coming in from the sea than the rivers, but yep, they need water. Yep.
Tadpoles.
Tadpoles, yep. So frogs, yep, they live their life cycle in areas like this, so they definitely need the freshwater systems. Yep.
Crabs.
Crabs, yeah, I think we've covered crabs, but yep, definitely, yep.
Turtles.
Turtles, yeah, so especially snake-necked turtles, long-necked turtles. So once the rivers dry up, they lose their habitat as well. Yeah.
Seahorse.
Seahorse, yeah, seahorse, they live in the ocean as well, also in the estuary. Not so much important for the freshwater. They won't find them in South Dandalup, but yep, they're important species.
Crabs.
Yeah, crabs you've spoken about, yep, down the back. Kangaroos, bandicoots, other animals, other vegetation as well, native vegetation needs the water to survive. Yeah, microscopic little things needed as well. So yeah, hands down for now, I think we've covered most of that. So it's really, really important. We have this important ecosystem downstream of the dam that we need to protect. So that's why we need to make releases from the dam every now and then, so that people like farmers can keep their livelihoods, and so that animals and other really important critters and fauna and flora, so plants that live in and around the river, can survive as well. Because if we take their water source away, they won't survive, they won't live. Okay, just one last thing I wanted to talk about before I hand over to Mr. Wally was what can we do? Because that was part of the brief as well as action that we can take as well. It's really, really important. When you look at the amount of water we use, Perth uses something like twice as much water per person. When I say Perth, I mean Mandurah as well. Just pop your hand down, mate. Use about twice as much water as other capital cities. It's got a lot to do with our climate. We get very little rainfall, whereas a lot of the other capitals get a lot more rainfall than we do. But we use way more water than what we really need to for most of the time. So it's really important that we're careful with the way we use our water, because as I said before, it's our most valuable resource we have. So you can forget about gold, iron ore, aluminium, all of those things. You can forget about beef production. None of that counts if we don't have water to survive on, because without water, everything dies. So we really need to be careful about the way we manage our water resources. So here we're in a water catchment. It's really important that the catchment stays clean so the water that we have doesn't get contaminated. That's why we have trees around here, not houses. But practical things that we can do to make sure that we don't use too much water are things like, what do you think? What should we do to cut down our water use? Yep. Yeah, stop having very long showers at home. Anyone else think of another? Yep. Yeah, don't get the tap on, so if you're brushing your teeth, turn the tap off while you're brushing your teeth. Anyone else think of other uses of water around the home? Yep.
Don't use much of the water and leave the tap running when you don't need it.
Yes, yep.
Bath.
Bath, yep, yep.
No bath.
Anyone else, can you think of other waters other than washing yourself? And it's really important that you drink water, so I'm not saying drink that water. Can anyone think of any other uses around the home for water? Yep.
Like when you have washing on and you drain The tube goes into the bowl.
Oh, so you're talking about your washing machine? Yep, yep. So washing machines, dishwashers, yeah. Plant native gardens, yeah, yep. So we use a lot of our water on watering our garden. So if you plant natives, they're used to the climate, or they're adapting to the climate. They don't need so much water to survive. So we're not using so much of our really precious resource on plants that we don't really need to have a lot of water. So things like lawns, you can still have lawns that aren't native. We have to water them less and less. That's why we have restrictions on how much water we can use. Yep.
Is there things like bore water and rainwater tanks?
Yeah, yep. So bore water, I said before, bore water is water that comes from underground. That's the stuff out of the sponge. The really, really good drinking water is down quite deep. So it's down sort of 10s to 100 metres down, and that's in an aquifer that's sort of underneath. The shallow aquifer, the sufficient surface aquifer that we can get water out of, that's that sponge right at the very top, that's not fit for drinking. So if we use that for other things, like for watering our garden, maybe for flushing the toilet, we use it for purposes where it doesn't need to be fit for drinking, then we can save our drinking water just for drinking. So yeah, that's a really important point. The household bores are good, but we don't want to overuse them as well. Yep, that's right. A few days with water, that's right. Food you can go for a month or so. Water, well, I can't. I can only go for a few hours. Water you can't live very long without it. Okay, yep, last one.
Wait, don't have 2-minute noodles because you have to boil water and put it in.
Yeah, I think 2-minute noodles is probably okay, but yeah, at least you're drinking the water that you're using though. Okay, so hopefully everyone's got the message. South Dandalup Dam, big dam. We're probably not going to build any more like this. Really important because it has our drinking water supplied. So we need to protect what's around it. That's why we don't have any houses. That's why we don't go swimming. That's why we've got these natural vegetation around that keeps the water nice and clean as it goes into the dam. Can anyone just remember, last questions, anyone remember the main sources of water that we use for drinking? Who hasn't answered the question? Yep, down the back of the beanie on.
Ocean water.
Yep, ocean water, so desalinated ocean water. Yep, next to you there. Yep.
Salt water.
Yeah, that's the ocean water, so the desal water. Yep, yep.
Rain.
Rainwater. Yep, yep. Surface water. There's one other big one right down the very back. Shower water, did you say? Yeah, that's what we use it for. But where does it come from? Yep, with the yellow cap on there. Yep.
Water underground.
Water underground. That's right. Then the last one, the last few percent, the really yucky one. Can anyone remember what that was? Yep.
Sewage water.
Sewage water. That's the one. Recycled water. Okay, and just the other take-home message is that it's not just for drinking, it's also what impacts downstream as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a bit later on when we go to Dwellingup too.
Just an observation thing, if you came up here with your family sometime, I would expect you to know something about just observation, general observation. So I would expect you to now know something about the signs, or at least to tell your family, we need to look at signage, because the signs behind us are very clear. Signs tell us what we need to know, and that's important, okay? It protects us, basically, like I said before. The other thing I want to say about here is that if you think about people who lived here before the dam was built, before roads were in place, that they had to live and use the water for drinking, use the water to swim in and bathe in and to clean themselves. But there was a more important Dreamtime story that helped people to have a good understanding and a really good respect of the waterways, wherever they were, from up this way right down to the ocean. So from here you got South Dandalup, the creek or the river, and you've got North Dandalup, two different waterways coming from two different areas. They come together and they join just before, near Pinjarra, just before the Murray River over there, and then they become one, and then it goes into the Murray River, okay? And as you know, the Murray River goes into the estuary, and then from the estuary the water empties into the ocean. So that's part of the water cycle, I guess, of water moving across the land and going back and making its way back. into the ocean, and then the evaporation or condensation evaporation, then transportation across. So it's part of the water cycle, but people used this. People use the waterway to benefit them and their families and their way of life. And so to help them understand the importance of water, the Woggle story as a Dreamtime story is often told. And it's about that female snake, the Woggle itself, the female, coming from the ocean, coming in through Port Mandurah, where we know Port Mandurah is these days, and creating the estuary. And then when she had eggs, she found out that she was pregnant, and the eggs to do with the thrombolites, we call the thrombolites the Woggle's eggs. So after she had eggs and her babies hatched there, they helped her to create other waterways, to create the lakes, to create the rivers and the creeks, all those tributaries that go into the rivers, they go into the estuary, they go into the ocean, okay? So as they came up into the hills area, and up the hills area, and coming up past this way, in creating those waterways, what happened then was those Woggles, the mum and her children, went down into the depth of the land. And they created, this is a Dreamtime story, they created the fresh water. The fresh water that comes up, bubbles up out of the earth and flows into making little creeks, lots of little creeks and then bigger creeks, and then goes into the rivers, which goes into the estuary, which goes into the ocean. Okay? And that's such a wonderful thing, because we can talk about that these days with what we know about these days, to do with the water cycle, to do with what is the best way to preserve and use our water. So whether it's a story from how people thought the rivers or the creeks were created and putting into their thinking, or whether it's today to do with using water so that we're not going to dry up our very finite or limited resource as a water and resource, it's really important. Okay, all these things combined together are things that are important, because going from the past to the present and into the future, these things that are important to us to do with the water cycle, we can use the past to look at the future. And what is in the future, what's happening now, is climate change. It's been happening for a while in different areas. But we can learn from the past with what we have today, and learn from all those things to then go into the future to do common sense things, things that are really important. You know, Dr. Fisher was talking about whether it's us drinking the water from the tap at home, or whether it's industry using water, or whether it's the whole lot of suburbia, all of us in agriculture using water. It's so important that we look after that source. And it's so important that we do what we believe to be right at this time. So the future is looked after as well. Okay? Okay, do you have any questions?
I have.
Yes.
Did the Aboriginal people come here?
People would come along here. There would have been pathways along the creek or river, and people would have hunted, looked for marrons and jilgies and catfish if they were up this way, the freshwater ones, and the other little fish. So I grew up eating lots of jilgies and lots of marrons. I love that. We didn't really have the yabbies around at that time because they're introduced, but certainly all of these things that are important, a food source, it is also about looking after those, like Dr. Fisher was saying, whether it's way downstream, the water flow's got to be fairly consistent. Yes?
So, how has anybody been actually like down in that area down there, or just the Aboriginals?
The rangers would go down there and have a look. Sometimes naughty people would go down there, if I can just say it like that, and they would want to find a feed of marron or gilgies, but they're not really allowed to because this place behind me and in front of you and behind us, the waterway is protected, so you can't really go down there and look for marron or gilgies, okay? Even though you might like the taste. The water catchment area has got to be protected. Yes, Mr.
Can you
Molly.
please tell me when the Aboriginal people, because we know that they moved for their food and for the seasons. So when would the Aboriginal people be up here in the hills?
The people would be up here more so in winter, because where we come from, when you were travelling between Pinjarra Road and going off the road to the other side track, the old Pinjarra Road, that has farming activities there now. But in the past, it was a big swamp. Lots of paperbark trees, which you see lots of paperbark still there. Lots of those bushes. And that tells us that it was a big swamp. We know it was a big swamp. So in winter, when there were lots of rain, that area between Pinjarra and Mandurah would have been really clogged up as a big swamp area. From Pinjarra going down to Waruna, going down to Bunbury Way, and from Mandurah, Pinjarra going north up to near Perth as well. So if this area was a big swamp area in winter, people could not live unless they went to the sand dunes like Dawesville Way and stayed there for the time, and people would have done that. But most people would have left that very wet area and come up the hill to places like this and lived up here for the few months of very, very wet conditions down on the Quangan or the Swan Coastal Plain. Someone from over this side, yes?
Would this be a colony? What kind of colony would it be?
Say again.
What colony would this place be?
A colony?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the question was what sort of colony would it have been? People would have come here, they would have camped here, they would have used the fresh water to drink here. So it's about big family groupings rather than a huge village of people or colony. Smaller groups were able to manage themselves better and the food resources better because, you know, there's no shops and all those sort of things, or bringing in foods from other places as well. It was about what you could find here. So you had to manage the food resources as well, mate. Yes?
I really like it.
Thank you. They're nice. Yes?
Were some Aboriginal people born here?
Back in time, absolutely. People were all over the place. They walked everywhere, obviously, and people would have built either small shelters that were going to help them over a few days, or they built a more stronger shelter that were going to be used for weeks and weeks and weeks if it was winter time and they had to live up here. I, as a little toddler, a baby as well, I know that my mum and my aunties, sometimes my aunties would take me from Serpentine at the train station there in these old carriages, ones that I think looked even older than those. And I just remember looking out the window at night and there was light, the light from the cabin was going into the darkness, and you could see the steam going past the train, from the train, the engine going past the carriages. And that is still in my memory, obviously, because I can recall that. And the trains itself, they had, this one came from Pinjarra, came to here, went to places like Dwellingup, beyond that wandering down to towns, Narrogin, Wage and Katanning Way as well. The trains went all over the place with probably your grandparents or your great grandparents in their younger days, that people could travel all over the place in these old trains, and that was pretty amazing. But sometime down the way, they stopped those old trains, and they started using more the trucks and the buses because it was a lot cheaper, I think. So these days, we still have these old carriages around the place, which is like a little museum. And we also have these dwellings here, which becomes like a little a museum, I guess, in its own self and right. So people who went on the trains, the older people could tell you stories of what it was like travelling from Pinjarra or from Perth to Bunbury or Perth to Pinjarra down and across over this way. And I just thought that was pretty amazing. These days they do have a train where you can come up here. Mrs. Wally and I came up here one time to do I think it was a 4 or 5 course meal in a carriage, and you started off from here and you went out that way for about, I don't know, an hour or so, and then where the train line, these train tracks stop, that's when you had to turn back. Otherwise you'd be stuck, obviously. But they served some meals going out there, and when we were coming back they served the sweets and snacks a bit after that, and it was really nice. So these days they try and keep up with all the, as a touristy place, you had a bit of a look at the playground and the what do you call that, the bike tracky thing.
Okay.
Yep. So Dwellingup the place is more of a touristy place these days, and that's nice. We sometimes bring the caravan up to Nanga Mill. That's another place where people go camping, and people take their caravans or their tents or their swags, and they go up there and their family, it's family time, okay? So these things are quite amazing that people can do in a place here or around Dwellingup.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to give you the Noongar name for Dwellingup. So can you say four syllables or 4 sounds? Dwellingup. Can you say Dwellingup? That's the Noongar name that's been here for a long time. Dwellingup. And that's just no. Okay? The Noongar name. So, a lot of the places, I'll just finish off with this, to do with where there were train stops. There was also, unless you want to speak about the timber industry.
Whenever you're ready, I can do it now. You can do it later.
Okay. A lot of the places where the train stopped, or the little stations or places where they, to do with the timber industry, are Noongar names. Okay? So these Noongar names are all over the place because it comes from thousands of years of the names being in place, and it's nice that they put these names in to do with the maps of the train lines. And the train lines go all over the place in the past. Okay? Any questions? Yes?
When was the last time you knew about these?
When there was, they advertise these things on, or wherever they advertise them. Where they advertise them so that people can buy a ticket or tickets, and you can come up here, you sit down in the chairs that face each other with a table, and then they serve you a meal, and they're all volunteers doing that. So that was the last time, which I think was maybe about 5 years ago. Yes?
We still have the next train trying to estimate the cost.
Ah, there you go. Yep. And that's an information sign for in the past where people would come up, they got their ticket from inside, they'd be waiting, and then you get that. What have we got in place now at the train station? It's all what? It's doing the same thing as that sign up there, but it's different.
What age have we got? We've got traditional, settlement, mechanical,
Technology.
Good. So if you've been to the train station and you're looking how long is it before the train leaves, it's in digital. Okay? They could have the old clocks up there, but digital is what is used these days. Any other questions? Good questions, Glenfields. Yes?
When you're on the train, how big are the tires?
Say again?
Like, for these trains,
The cabins, carriages, yes?
how big were the tires? More, bigger, smaller?
So the tyres on trains are actually made out of steel, so they're actually already on there. So it's a bit hard to see. This bit here, the tyre, so it's steel that's pressed on, so they don't have rubber tyres like cars, they have steel tyres.
Yeah.
So you have to change them every now and then because they do wear out. They're very, very hard, so they last a long time compared to tyres of cars. So is that what you want to know? So that side, you can put steel.
Have you ever been on the forest train?
The forest.
Yeah, it's like an outdoor train. So,
So there's one of the trains that leaves from here goes through the forest. So there's the restaurant train. There's also the steam train that goes through the forest, up in the valley one. There's also one down in Pemberton as well, which is a bit more like what you're talking about as well. That goes through the forest.
Yeah. They're also having a Hodden Valley train ride. I think that might be from, I'm not sure, but from Pinjarra up here.
You can see them all up on the.
Yeah, no, I've been from one that left here, and it was open, I'm pretty sure too. It wasn't closed in.
Yeah, so you get the forest train.
So that's what you're
Oh, there you
thinking
go.
of.
So would the trains have always looked like this, Mr. Wally? Or would they have looked differently right back at the beginning when everybody cut the trees down and they needed to move the trees from one place to another?
The carriages. Okay.
Yeah.
With that, Mrs. Wally, if I can hand it over to you, Dr. Fisher. Yeah, we're sort of talking about a number of different things to do with a similar question.
So just pop your hands down for a bit and then you can ask questions. And I'll just give you a little bit of history of the town, and that maybe answer some of the questions as we go. So it's called Dwellingup now. European settlement started here in about 1880. This is about 140 years ago, so not really a long time ago compared to the normal timescale, but a long time ago in terms of European settlement. So Europeans first arrived in Western Australia in about 1829, and then about 50 to 60 years after that they came to Dwellingup. So Dwellingup was a great spot. It's in between the South Dandalup River that we saw today and the Murray River, so it's in that valley between the two. The thing that Dwellingup had going for it, apart from the water resources and all those things we've spoken about already, was the forest. So we saw the forest that grew trees all the way down to the side of the dam. You saw them this morning as big trees. So forestry was a big industry in Dwellingup. So Dwellingup actually became a town in about 1910. It was gazetted. That means it was made a proper town in 1910. That's about 110 years ago. From that time all the way up until current day, it's been a logging town. So it's been a town that supports forestry. We cut down trees and use it for timber and other goods. There were regulations. There's no regulations for cutting trees down before 1915, so up until about 100 years ago. And since 1915, there's been gradually more and more laws and rules about what you can and can't cut down in the forest. In 2024, that's next year, you won't be allowed to cut, not you, but there's no forestry industry anymore. You're not allowed to cut down trees, native trees, so pine trees and other things that were planted as plantations you can, but the native trees like your jarrahs and your marries and blackbutt can't be cut down for forestry anymore. So what used to be a timber town back in the day, this is why the trains were here to transport logs and people around, has now had to transform from being a timber town into being a tourism town. So while timber and logging and forestry was the main industry for 100 years or more, Now it's become about tourism. So we have people going for rides on trains to experience what it would have been like back in the good old days. We've got the pump track, we've got trails where you can get on a bike and ride around and ride through the forest and enjoy it for what it is, rather than for the products that it produces. So that's been the change. I think one of the things we had to talk about today was tourism and changing in land use. It's been a huge change here from forestry into become a tourist town. To answer the question about the trains, what they might have looked like, if you catch a train from Mandurah to Perth, the first thing you notice is got all electric wires up the top. So the train runs on electricity. You can't see any wires here. So the trains here now run either on diesel, so they've got a big diesel engine that pulls them, or they have a steam engine, and I think there's still a steam engine around the other side, where you boil water. Again, there's water that you need to make the train run. You boil water in a boiler to make steam, and then that drives the train. So back in the day, they would have run on steam. The Hotham Valley train that runs still runs on steam. Sometimes they run on diesel as well. But yeah, if you catch a train now from Perth to Mandurah, it's an electric train, so a more efficient way of doing things. You don't need to stick up the electric cables. So this is just a little bit of history. I haven't spoken a lot about forestry. We might talk about that later if we've got time. But really the point of my talk is to give you a little bit of history of the town. One big thing that happened here in 1961, that's around the time that Mr. Wally and I were born, a huge bushfire came through Dwellingup and burnt the whole town to the ground. Like the whole town disappeared. It wasn't here anymore. So they rebuilt the town. That fire was huge. I'm not sure how many people lost their lives. I think there's some information about in the visitor centre. But the area that was burnt was about 120,000 hectares. Again, that's a big number. That means not much to you. If you think of the size of Optus Oval, it's about 100,000 times the size of Optus Oval was the amount of area that was burnt by the bushfires. All the buildings, everything got burnt down, and they rebuilt Dwellingup. So Dwellingup was the only town in this area that they rebuilt after the fire. So it also took out other places like Hollyoake and Bankshire and Marrinup, I think was the other place. But they rebuilt Dwellingup. So that happened in 1961, about 60 years ago.
So here's a bit of trivia. When that fire went through in 1961, Mrs. Wally was only just a baby, and my parents had to pack everything into their caravans and get out of town. We lived in Yarloop, so that's right over the other side of the hills, heading down towards Pinjarra, further south. That's how far it went. So it was really, really big.
You were there?
I was only a baby.
And I wasn't born, so I must be younger than Mr. Wally.
Nicely done.
So you can do the maths now, you know how long it is. Probably quite a long time ago. I'm not sure exactly when they cut this one down, but it's probably quite a long time ago, because you're not allowed to cut down old growth trees like this anymore. So it probably happened 50 to 100 years ago they cut this one down. This is a jarrah tree, or part of a jarrah tree, and this one is about 600 years old before they cut it down. So they grow to about 1,000 years old. Not everything lasts forever, so trees do die. They grow to about 1,000 years for jarrah trees. They generally grow somewhere between 50 and 70 metres tall. This log itself is something like 10 or 15 metres long, so it's only part of the tree. There would have been another 2 times that amount, probably, or even more, when it was standing up. So jarrah is really strong timber. It's used for timber products. Very strong, hard wood, great for building. So see jarrah, back in the day they used to make floorboards and other things out of it, and the timber in houses was made out of jarrah. Now they tend to use pine more than jarrah. Pine is a renewable, sustainable jarrah.
The jarrah tree behind us. Jarrah is a Nyungan name. Chewit, if you know the chewit tree, that is a Nyungan name and common name. The Wandu is a Nyungan name and common name. Mary, if I've not said that, is a Nyungan name and common name as well. Okay, so it's nice that the trees that have been here for a long, long time is the name is still continuing to be a common name, the name that we all use. These trees here, they're the pine tree. There's different types of pine trees. They're more introduced, okay? The species of that kind of tree, not native to the southwest, but certainly an important tree as well, because in the timber industry these days you do use the pine tree to make planks, and planks are used to make products, okay? Okay.
Yeah, so when we talk about, we'll get to your question in a second, when we talk about old growth forest, this would be from an old growth forest. So definitely not allowed to log in old growth areas anymore. You're not allowed to log in any areas anymore. Native trees, so all the trees that I was just talking about with the Noongar names, you might have noticed that pine isn't a Noongar name. All the ones that have Noongar names attached to them, they're all native, so they're the things that we're not allowed to cut down in forestry and from 2024, so from next year onwards. We're not allowed to do that anymore. You can still do it for some clearing or if there's bushfire hazards or that sort of stuff. There's an industry that carves the trees. We just can't do it anymore. It's not sustainable. Depends on who you talk to, but native trees aren't sustainable anymore in forestry. You had a question, not in the world. In the USA, they have huge sequoia trees. So they grow to hundreds of metres tall. So they get much bigger. Yeah, so no, that wouldn't have been. There would have been bigger trees than that as well. But that's bigger than what you'll find now, mostly, unless you go to old growth areas where they have them. But given that they last for about 1,000 years, or 600 years old, it wouldn't have got a lot bigger. It wouldn't have got twice as big. It's done most of its growing already. Yep. The leaves of this one. Oh, well, they cut all the branches off. The thing about jarrah trees is they have these really straight trunks and not too many branches come off. They're very straight. That's why they're so good for making timber. So yeah, they would have cut all those off and the leaves would have just been left behind and rotted away in the forest. Yep. So this is what they would have used to pull with a horse. They would have used to pull these logs out of the. Well, that one's probably pretty big. It probably would have been fitted on there, but the smaller logs they would have got on the back of those carts.
These days we have those big trucks to carry logs from out in the bush to where they're going to cut them up. These here would have been how those big logs would have been carried, okay? So big difference between this and the trucks that we see on the road carrying logs.
Any other questions?